This is an additional video to my previous theory about an extremely important story to the FNAF franchise, The Mimic. Today though, we're specifically talking about the tales from the Pizzaplex series, and their canonicity to the game timeline as they're beginning to affect the game seriously, and people will start questioning whether they're canon or not. Future me here, and I'm glad I was making this video this week after both Fuhnaff and RyeToast say that they're not canon to the games, and simply parallels. Although remember, this was written before their videos released and obviously no hate to them. This is just a theory after all. Before we begin though, I want to quickly explain what Scott Cawthon himself has said about FNAF's canon, FNAF's continuity, and the FNAF universe all mean to him. Scott has previously mentioned how the book trilogy is canon to FNAF as a whole, and like the Fazbear Frights, are simply in the FNAF universe, just like the games are, yet they take place in separate continuities, meaning timelines. So just because something may be canon to FNAF's larger universe doesn't necessarily mean that they're in the same timeline, and even the Ultimate Guide doubles down on that difference. So with this information in mind, and without further ado, let's begin talking about where Tales stands. Is it simply canon to the larger universe of FNAF, or set in the game continuity? First of all, you need to subscribe if you haven't already, considering that's meant to happen in every timeline. But seriously, first of all, I want to go over the most damning evidence that the tales are in the game timeline. 2 confirmations. Although Scott Cawthon himself hasn't said anything about the Tales series specifically, we have confirmation elsewhere. Scholastic originally marketed these books as set in the world of the newest games, which while yes has since been removed from most listings, and Tom emailed Scholastic about why it was removed, and they confirmed that although the statement was removed due to a change in our marketing strategy, it does not affect the content of the series, meaning it was only removed for marketing reasons and not because it's no longer true. And I do find it interesting that confirmation like this was never in the Frights descriptions, ever, unlike how the rest of the Tales descriptions are simply copy and pasted from the Frights descriptions, besides the story descriptions themselves. So this quote was intentionally added for the Tales series specifically, telling us that they are 100% connected to the games without a doubt. Also, like I mentioned earlier, we've had very specific wording for the larger FNAF universe as a whole, but world is new phrasing about FNAF's canonicity that's been used just for this series, strongly implying they're not just in the larger universe like the book trilogy, but specifically in the games. Even if we disregard this previous quote and the previous wordings from Scott, we have a confirmation that comes from the future, specifically about the tales in Scholastic's August catalogue. This obviously goes through a bunch of books from Scholastic by the time of August, including Tiger Rock, alongside the other tales from the Pizzaplex books, giving us the selling points for this series, including that this series features the newest futuristic animatronics and settings from the upcoming Freddy games, doubling down on the previous quote and telling us again that this series is directly connected to the games. Although something that keeps people separating the 2 timelines is mostly because of the Pizzaplex's layout and design. Although not only did the Pizzaplex described in the Bobby Dot stories get changed to specifically be more accurate to the game's Pizzaplex, to the point it gives us the exact number of lanes in Bonnie Bowl, a completely accurate Monty Golf and Fazzablast, etc., as well as Somnophobia and Drowning's Pizzaplex being the same as the games, but we know that the Pizzaplex goes through frequent renovations and changes many times, from its first layout in 2025 and the layout we play through at the end of its 4th year in 2029. We know this mainly due to how within the game itself, we see that a lot of places are still being constructed, and we even find remnants of a previous statue underground. Not only that, but we have multiple stories that mention construction happening around the Pizzaplex, whether it's locations or attractions, such as in the story literally called Under Construction, where an augmented reality unit is closed due to construction, and in the first book of the series, in the story Lally's Game, where we learn that the Pizzaplex is still going under renovations and changing, even though this story takes place in the future of the timeline, past Security Breach itself. The Pizzaplex is always under construction and never completely finished in the books nor in the game itself, so any differences throughout the many years that it's opened aren't necessarily debunks. To add to all of this, something small I want to point out is that we know the first year Pizzaplex wouldn't be as large as the Pizzaplex that we play through anyways, considering timeline wise the Pizzaplex was constructed within a year or so. Despite construction being why it's different and why it changes, the layout of the Pizzaplex and attractions within it helps us connect each story to each other too. For example, under construction, Haps, Clethophobia, GGY, and the Storyteller all feature the Fast Freddy attraction, and the Storyteller also connects to the Bobby Dots with the mention of the Fazplex Tower, and the tree itself being in Nexie, while under construction connects to the future story Tiger Rock with the VR booth. It seems like a lot of these stories are connected through the attractions, and so if the Storyteller and GGY are in the game's timeline, for example, it's extremely safe to say that the others are connected too. Although I should point out that the main ones that have the most evidence being in the same continuity, which I'll go through in a second, are GGY, the Storyteller, the Mimic, and the Epilogues. While the other stories, if you really want to disregard them for some reason, can be pick and choose, as the only real connection they have is with the attractions and general layout being similar between them. Although I personally think they're all in the games, since the quotes confirming that are talking about the series as a whole and not specific stories. So despite telling us they're in the game's continuity and that working perfectly fine between the books themselves, there are a lot of connections between the stories in the games too. GGY is the story that is outright shown to be in the same continuity as the games, within Security Breach itself, featuring Gregory having all the high scores on the arcades and being patient 46, causing Vanessa's therapist to disappear. Also, specifically after the book releases where we learn of Hacker Patient 46, we got a leaked Ruin teaser with a hackery device with the date 4/6, which is a pretty strong connection. The Tales story Help Wanted directly tells us the story of Steve Snodgrass, the indie game developer sneakily hired by Fazbear Entertainment, who only finishes the first 3 games, which is directly shown to be the case in FNAF Help Wanted. There are also blood splatters found in the pizza place in-game, which connects perfectly to the Mimics massacre down there, and the blob may also contain their corpses, which is a theory for another day. In the Bobby Dots Part 1, DJ Music Man attacks an employee exactly like he does in the game, peering into the bathroom menacingly and then its hand exploring the area. The reason he does this is apparently because of his experimental bouncer mode. Not only do the epilogues in some stories directly tell us Burntrap's true origins, but there are a whole lot of connections to the games from specifically the Mimic and the Storyteller stories themselves, such as the Bobab tree design on the door leading to the Afton creature in Princess Quest, Glitchtrap's visual pain mimicking how Edwin's pain is described, Mimic's arm being in the position seemingly mimicking its first ever position of holding a plush, the Endo warehouse showing mimicking off, damaging the glam rocks just how the Mimic was damaged, Stillwell teasing schematics before the game released which would read about a manual for the Mimics in the epilogues, which themselves show off Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, and we know Burntrap was never its canon name to begin with, since they most likely already had the plan to call it Mimic. These stories even solve a lot of mysteries from Security Breach, such as the post-it room and the wall code. Something small that Anton pointed out on Twitter was that in an interview with Dorco, Ray McCaffrey, the producer for Stillwell Studios, was simply,
I get an email from Scott, and he says, hey, put this stuff in the game. I look at it all, and I examine it as a producer would do, and I say, I have no idea what any of this means. And he goes, yeah, put it in the game.
Which may have actually been about the Easter eggs to do with putting GGY on the arcade machines, the small details like Mimic's arm holding a plush, and stuff like that. Something that I and many others predict will be brought up is that Edwin Murray has a lot of similarities to Henry Emily, and so he may just be a parallel to Henry for the book's continuity. However, the two characters are vastly different. First of all, Edwin gets bought out by Fazbear's, which Henry himself owns with William, so the two characters already coexist and can't be parallels even in this timeline. But secondly, Edwin doesn't actually create the animatronics, and instead just repairs them and fixes them and their programming up, while Henry actually creates the animatronics, with William being more on the business side. Also, Henry dies in 2023, while Edwin lives on for many years longer and impacts the events of Security Breach, which itself couldn't happen if FNAF 6 didn't happen, which Edwin being a parallel for the books would mean that Henry wouldn't exist. Some may also say that Henry made Mr. Hugs same as Edwin, but Henry actually didn't make most of the FNAF 6 animatronics, considering they're all from different companies through a catalogue. Although even if we say that Henry owns everything in the catalogue due to the Rockstars, we know that Fazbear's already has Mr. Hugs because Edwin was bought out by Fazbear's before the story even begins, and so Mr. Hugs is most likely under their control. Furthermore, their child's deaths are entirely different too and literally opposite to each other, for reasons are put on screen instead of rambling about that one thing. To the point, the only real parallel with them specifically is that they're both young when they die and a car is there. So now the only real connection between the two characters is that they both make an animatronic for their child. Although even that, Henry makes it to protect Charlie while Edward makes it to entertain David. The security puppet fails while the mimic never has. There's simply not enough to warrant Edwin just being a Henry parallel for the books, and disregarding the entire story, even if it's a thematic parallel in the series, where a child's death occurs and their father builds a robot which eventually gains their agony. Although even that parallel only happens with novel Henry, and not even game Henry. The two are completely different characters that coexist, and Edwin is not a parallel. Future me here again, and both FNAF and RyeToast say that the mimic is Glitchtrap and Burntrap in the games, and in that continuity, while Edwin and the story itself isn't, which at least to me doesn't work, considering Edwin himself is the only reason for the mimic being made in the first place, and it was made specifically for David. Either way, this is just a theory, even though I really think all this information outright confirms it, but please remember, don't send any hate to theorists, and be respectful when discussing or debating. And I hope you all enjoyed this video. I'll see you next week.